Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Jive Talk. This time I've got an interview with a guy who I've known about for at least 12 years. I first heard about Paul Waggener in 2013 when he released a PDF booklet called The Centurion Method about a new approach to health and fitness that involved using the environment. And then I kept following him after that. In 2015, I appeared on the first millennial with his brother, Jarnifer Matthias, and he seemed a very interesting guy. And I learned through that about the Wolves of Vinland, which had been going since 2006, which is a group of heathens community in Virginia run by Paul and his brothers. And 2016, he was running Operation Werewolf, which I was interested in. And when I was living in Sweden, I was in contact with a Nordic chapter, which was loosely affiliated with the main Operation Werewolf in America. And more recently, I've been very much enjoying Paul's podcast, Call Sign Werewolf, which is excellent and is full of very good advice for people who are new to health and fitness and heathenry and life reform, and also people who have been involved in such things for a long time and just need some reminders on how to get their act together. We got a lot of things in common because we're just about reaching middle age. We're both around 40 years old, and we're both fathers of young children. We both come from the kind of subcultural millennial Gen X youth culture backgrounds, but we both pivoted into like lifestyle reform, Evolian philosophy, Germanic heathenry, as a way to restore spiritual health. And we've both been very unfairly attacked by the media. Many lies said about each of us as a way to defame us and to sort of get us out of the picture and try to prevent us from doing good for other people. So since 2013, the health, fitness and lifestyle influencer landscape is a lot busier than it used to be. But Paul here has been consistent throughout all that time and is a good deal more valuable than most of the people in that scene. So without further ado, welcome to Jive Talk, Paul.
Thanks for having me on, Tom. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to start off with that, what I mentioned there about the subcultures thing. Like, can you talk a little bit about your background before you reformed your life or whatever, and how that influenced your ideas of tribalism and the importance of tribe in the modern world?
Sure. I think that one part of that was inseparable just from growing up with three older brothers. When you grow up in that kind of environment, there's always sort of an us versus them kind of feel. My last name was always very important to me, my family. You know, anytime we went somewhere, people would say, oh, here come the Waggener brothers kind of thing. And taking that into the subculture, when I was a teenager, I got into, like we were talking about earlier, punk and oi and skinhead stuff. And so I think by the time I was maybe around 14 or something like that, I had, the boots and braces and shaved head and everything like that, lifting weights and fighting a lot and drinking a lot of beer. And I still have the tattoo on my arm of the skinhead crew I was running by the time I was around 17, 18. And there was a lot of good to come from that. I think that even looking back, when you can see sort of how chaotic it was and how immature a lot of it was, there was a value in having obviously peer group and pressure group. But I think one of the reasons that these things stay valuable is you can look back at them and see what you wouldn't do again, and the things that maybe didn't serve you as well, or the issues that arose from that kind of stuff. So it definitely informed, but sometimes in the negative and sometimes in the positive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So do you think that subculture is kind of a misdirected form of tribalism that had to manifest in the modern world because of the absence of proper rituals of initiation into manhood and things like that so absent in Western culture now? Or was it just, is it more of like a thing that's just more negative? Or
no, I don't even think that a lot of it is misdirected. I think that where we see it misdirected is in things like sports fandom or what people call communities now, right? This online community or this community or that community of something that's completely banal and stripped of all sacred things or anything. Whereas I don't think it's misdirected tribalism to be part of a gang, whether that's skinhead culture if you're a Caucasian guy, although I guess there's trad skins and stuff like that, but those things do keep a lot of the sacred nature alive, because there's almost no clearer expression these days of the youth mannerbund than stuff like skinhead culture, hardcore culture, where you have to train, you have to fight, you have to do all the rest of this kind of stuff. And there is ritual in that. There is ritual in seeing guys. I've been all over Europe with Operation Werewolf crews that did jump-ins. And although we don't do that in my club, there's a ritual to that. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that it's always misdirected. I think subculture will always exist, because tribalism on one level will always exist. People want to belong to things. They want meaning.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose what I thought is that maybe the subculture wouldn't be as necessary in a culture where the youth group was a natural and integrated part of society. But I know that when I was a young man, and I got into punk and hardcore and things like that, and I remember some older person saying, "Oh, it's just because he wants to be an individual. He wants to be an individual." I was thinking, it's not that. It's the opposite. It's because I want to be a part of a group, and I don't feel like I should have felt, if British identity was sufficient, to be British should have been enough. But it wasn't sufficient because there wasn't a room for me and my friends to be that. So that's why I think Britain had things like the mods and rockers early on in the 60s after the war, and we didn't have it before the war. And I think it was a direct problem to the issue of the youth in the post-war West, or in Britain first, but I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, no, I do. And I think that this is one of the differences and interesting aspects between my European friends and my friends in America, is that the idea that if I was from Iceland or Sweden, or if I was from Bavaria or something like that, that I would have this local identity, and that maybe there would be some kind of culture that you could adhere to that came specifically from that. But that in America, I was born in DC, I grew up in Wyoming, I live in Virginia. I mean, this is a huge span of area that I've lived just in my 40 years. And that Americanism has never appealed to me. It always seemed like this sort of Norman Rockwell kitsch. And although there are aspects of America that I think are phenomenal and that are great, and when you go over to Europe, you never feel more American. You maybe that's the only time you've ever felt American. But that there is no, I think, true American expression really that appealed to me when I was younger. And so you have to find these other niches and these other things that appeal to you, whether that's through music or training or an ethnic element or whatever it is, because within a country like ours, where you have all these disparate peoples and disparate languages and beliefs, you kind of have to pare it down a little bit more than just say, I'm American. And that idea has always been a bit absurd to me.
Mm. Also another thing that's big in your philosophy is the idea of living with purpose, bringing that meaning to life. And I think that's what attracts people to your content as well as to mine, because they're looking for something more to life than what's on offer in the general mainstream culture. But what exactly does it mean to you to live with purpose?
You're sort of the man on this, but I like studying the words themselves. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times we have these conversations and someone says, well, what does it mean to have purpose? And you're like, well, what is, at the risk of Jordan Petersoning everything, well, what does it mean? But purpose is, I think if we look it up, it has to do with intention and aim, doing things with a goal in mind, doing things with something in mind, rather than just doing what we feel like in the moment. And so I think that anytime we have the idea of how do I live with purpose? How do I do things? It really could be a bad one or a good one. But to live with purpose is just ensuring that the day-to-day things that we do, that all of the actions that we perform are in line with this further thing, that there's intention there and that there's a goal behind it, rather than what most people do, which is sort of live in all directions at once. And this is why they're distracted by each new thing, and they're very easy to manipulate and to make go this way or that way. And so I think that if you are trying to live with purpose, people can get very distracted by a great number of things, but honing that down to something that is valuable and that is worthwhile, for example, concepts like honor or a specific ideal or a specific faith, if you're religious or whatever, these are the things that you need to set your sights on, because without having that North Star, you really can't live a life of purpose because you don't have an end goal in mind.
Many who start on this process you've described, where they look for this purpose and meaning, they start off really well and they make good gains, physically, spiritually. Their life starts to look better, but they can't keep it going indefinitely and they start to experience burnout. And so for those kind of people who are listening, what advice would you give to them so that they can stick to their guns and not just have it as a fad that makes, temporary changes in their life?
Yeah. I mean, and that's sort of the crux of all this stuff, right? If you're boxing, if you're weight training, if you're doing any of this kind of stuff, a couple weeks or a few months or even a year on it, if you quit for a year, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. One of the things that I hate to hear people talk about, and you'll see this quite often, is people always would tell you to be realistic. Be realistic about this. And I think the Western writer Louis L'Amour said that when people tell you to be realistic, it's always when they're trying to get you to give up on something that you believe in. And so I would say that be unrealistic with your goals, set very extreme sort of monolithic goals for yourself, but set many realistic landmarks along the way to something unrealistic. I think a lot of times people have their sights set so far in advance in the future that it begins to seem impossible and like they're not making any market progress to that. And what I like to do is, if I'm trying to bench 405 pounds, I don't just say, well, I'm at 135 now and I've made no progress until I get to where I want to. I break this down into all these different landmarks. Another good thing that may seem a bit childish is that humans love a reward system. I will often do this with either work or with different things where I'll say to myself, if I do this, or if I get X done, or if I have a month where I do well financially or whatever, then I'll do Y. And having something like that in front of you where you can make these little rewards to yourself can be very nice, rather than just feeling like you're sort of this Instagram influencer mindset of just staying on the grind, no days off, which I fucking hate the idea of, and I've always done. I think that the other stuff that can be more difficult for people who simply don't have it in their lives is that accountability to a peer group, or even to a single individual that you have a lot of respect for, can make or break a lot of people. They talk about, there's a lot of data out there of people who train alone versus people who train with a training partner. Those who train with a partner tend to be more consistent over a long period of time because you're accountable to them. If you have any sense of shame at all or any sense of honor, you won't be the guy who's late. You'll show up on time and know that the guy's going to be there waiting for you if you miss it. So you always have to have a reason for this kind of stuff, right? And keep it in front of you, which goes back to what we talked about with purpose, is that to be a man, you have to do these things. To be a man, you have to improve yourself. You have to train. You have to do this stuff. It's just not even an option or a question to not do so. And you've got to keep this stuff in front of you at all times and try to remember that whatever you felt like when you wanted to start doing it, even if that feeling is gone, the fact is that this is your duty, and it doesn't matter how you feel on the day to day. You know what I mean? You simply have to continue doing it. But it is that idea of sort of the road stretched out forever that breaks most people, I think, and turns them into cowards.
And I mean, as you're getting older, the body starts to take longer to recover and responsibilities in life heap up, and meeting the challenges that you set yourself in youth, it gets harder and harder. So like, how do you think young men and older men need to embody different ideals in that respect? Like, what is it that the kind of middle-aged guys face that like they hadn't encountered earlier in life?
Yeah, I think this is a really good one, and it's one that both of us have probably been thinking about a lot more as we get older. There was a certain point, and 40 is not old, right? 40 is sort of what they consider to be the middle, and I think that's a hopeful middle. But that 40 and kind of as soon as I hit my mid 30s, I think about 35, the hangovers hurt worse. Injuries weren't so much getting hurt in training. They became chronic problems that continued to come back or that I couldn't get rid of. And I started to realize around 40, after enough motorcycle crashes, enough injuries in jiu-jitsu and lifting and all the rest of this kind of stuff, that it was possible that I was never going to be able to match previous athletic landmarks. They were going to have to change. Like, I don't know that I'll ever bench 405 again. It was a great thing to have done, but I don't think I'm probably ever going to do it again. And that can fuck with the brain in a way where you say, well, so I'll never be as good. Well, maybe not in that aspect. And I think one of the hardest things, and what I'm really trying to learn, my old lady keeps telling me I have to learn how to age gracefully, because she says I've pretty much had an abusive relationship with my body for years and years and years, and that I just keep demanding things from it. And at a certain point, it's going to stop giving me that. But that when we're young, it's good to be cocky. It's good to be a bit arrogant. It's good to set these titanic goals. And as we get older, we need to pivot not on setting these big goals or still holding on to these big dreams that we've had, but of understanding that they will manifest for us in different ways. And I think that with age, and if the body's breaking down, I think that older guys have to realize they have to sort of go through a metamorphosis into a different aspect of community or a friendship or even just of a relationship with themselves, which is that there's an admitting that has to come along with this. Gray's going to get into your hair. The mileage may have been good, but it's going to turn your hair gray. You may never be able to do some of the things that you did when you were younger on a physical level anymore. But ideally, you have made a great amount of progress in who you are and the leverage that you have in the world, and that the things that you have to offer to the people around you have deepened in a great way, and that you are still very valuable, even if you can't punch your weight like you used to anymore. And I think that getting ourselves to that level of realization and realizing that there's still a value is very challenging for guys who have lived their whole life in an extremely physical fashion. I know it's been very hard for me. But community is another aspect of that maybe we'll get into. I think that older guys who are just aging and breaking down physically, who don't have a community to be useful to, have a bigger problem on their plate than guys who do have that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, you're someone who does have a community, but I understand from your podcast that even so, you've got maybe reaching this stage in life has perhaps changed your ideas of what it means to build a tribe. Because previously the Wolves of Vinland was centered around things that pretty much only young men can do.
Yeah, and one of the things that's funny is my friend and I were talking about this the other day, and he had given me a copy of a black metal record that we both like, which has a song on it. And in the song, it's a band called Watane, and they have a track called Wild Hunt. And it says in there's this great line. It says, better that we didn't know then what we know now. And it resonated with me with our group a lot, because if we had known the complexities and if we had known all the challenges, we might never have done it. And what we did was we created a world and a counter society and all the rest that was perfect for us then. Well, I was 22, 23 years old or something like that. I'm 40 now, so 21 maybe. And the world that's perfect for you as a single 21-year-old with very few responsibilities and not a lot of fucks to give is a lot different from being 40 with a family and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And so the group has had to evolve a lot. It's gone through a lot of forced evolution as this kind of stuff happens. Guys who are young then are getting older now. Guys who are coming in who are really young, they have a different hierarchy to go through. They have older guys telling them, hey, this is how we do things, which we didn't have. We were shooting in the dark, And so realizing that creating a gang is a lot different from creating a community. And we had that then. And what we have now is a lot more family, community, and in the true sense of the word, rather than sort of a lot of really young thugs with good hearts, which is pretty much what we were back then. Although it was a great time. And it forces you to reassess not whether what you did was right or wrong. It was correct. It was correct for the time. But if you keep on with that, and if you keep on with a lifestyle that was good for you at 21, when you're 40, it's a little bit like that Wile E. Coyote thing from the cartoons where you've run out past the cliff, and that cliff that you built is no longer underneath you. You needed to build a bridge into a new lifestyle. And if you don't do that, you're sort of failing to learn the lessons of history. And at a certain point, you're going to look down and you're going to fall,
Yeah, I've never succeeded in building a tribe on a scale that you have, but I have a hearth here in Devon, and it started off with just a group of young friends, and we tried to orient all the rituals and events accordingly. And, some of the locations are impossible to get to for the infirm and things like that. And, but gradually, as more of us are getting married and having children, we try to integrate women and children into it. And it's changed the whole dynamic, but it's a necessary change to be made.
Yeah, and there's a lot of guys out there who I think they never want to get past this sort of Peter Pan, Lost Boys part of stuff, and I think for a lot of those guys, especially ones that you see maybe start a group later in life, their community or their little clique of guys is like their man cave. It's like their getaway from their old lady who maybe runs their life when they're home, and you can see this boyish play acting with this kind of stuff, which my group gets accused of, like LARPing, and you guys get accused of this kind of stuff. But my question for these people is always, when does it cease to be that? Because I've been doing this since I was in my teens, and I'm still doing it now. And the big difference between creating something as an escape from your normal life and as creating something that is your normal life. When you talk about the idea that some of these locations that you do are you can't get to them if you're not healthy or if you're old or whatever. Maintaining some of those things is good, because what we've realized now is there was this split. Yes, we started to get older, but new guys coming in were still young and they still want to do that stuff. So you have to create this space for both of those things. So, for example, one of our solstice, winter solstice, it's up a mountain, you know what I mean? And one of our guys would do it with his kid on his back and everything like that. He's a super strong guy, very fit. But we go all the way up there and the fires happen up on top of a mountain. And it's not for the old or the infirm. But now what we do is when we get done with it up there, we come back to the hall and then the ritual happens there with the community. So finding these ways to involve both the young and the older is quite a challenge, but you have to provide the young guys with the stuff that you were able to do when you were young. Otherwise, you've doomed yourself to being the old guys who sit in there while the young guys listen to you tell your fucking stories over and over, and you don't give them the opportunity to tell their own, which is very unfair to them. You know?
I mean, that's exactly the sort of reason that you and your friends created this tribe separate from the mainstream society in the first place, right? Because I wouldn't want to be the sort of person who would drive young people away from heathenry, for example, because I failed to make space for like the specific needs that young men have.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is that even the dumb shit that I did when I was young, which or not so young, which there was a lot of. I have never been accused of being a genius in my life, and that even that stuff, that now that you're an older guy, you want to look at the young guys and say, hey man, you probably shouldn't do that. A lot of the time I try to leave it and let them do it, because if they go to jail, if this happens or that happens, or they do this wild shit, well, doing a lot of that stuff when I was young is what got me to being who I am now. And I wouldn't change that for anything. And so sometimes you even have to check yourself on giving good advice, because they got to find out on their own. I mean, did you listen to anybody when you were young? Probably not. You did what you were going to do, and to hell with them. And that's how you learn, because I think that women may learn in a different way than men learn, but I think men only learn through pain. It's the only way they learn, is through self-induced hardship, And so even with that, it's a challenge, man, because you want to, as an older guy, say, let me help you through this, or let me give you this advice. And sometimes it's better to say, you got to do it on your own, figure it out. You'll be a stronger 30-year-old or 40-year-old if you do this stuff on your own when you're in your 20s,
It's especially difficult as a father of a young boy, because I recognize myself saying all the kind of things my father said that I didn't listen to, and I know that he won't listen to. And the only way it's going to happen is the same way it happened for me. He's got to go through the same mistakes himself.
For sure. With my little boy, Victor, one of the things that everybody laughs about is that there is no time when you will be sitting in the long haul that he will not remind you that the stove is very, very hot, because he had to learn the hard way. You tell him, hey, this is hot. And until he touched it himself and he burned his hand and got a bad blister, he didn't give a fuck about you telling him don't touch that. But once he did, holy cow. Every time someone walks around, it's my little guy, my little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy looking at you very seriously and saying, very hot, very hot. And now what's he doing? He's trying to admonish other people and tell them, hey, don't touch it. But, you got to do it on your own.
What do you think are the most common mistakes that people, I guess mostly young people, but any people make when they're trying to build a community of the sort that you've built?
Well, I can probably speak with authority on this because I probably made them all, and had to correct them all. So any mistake that I'll point out here is definitely one that I'm sure I'm guilty of at various times. But I think one of the worst, and this is what I see when a lot of guys ask me how to do this, is that they're very young. And not that it's wrong to start your own crew when you're young. It's the best time to start it. But they're very young and they haven't asked themselves the question, why would anyone want to join my group in the fucking first place? Who am I? There's a very motivating element in that question. It shouldn't be asked as a self-deprecation. It should be asked as a motivation and a call to action. What am I doing with my life? Is my life exciting? Are the things that I'm doing something that other young guys would look at and say, man, this guy's fucking awesome. I may even be better at this thing than he likes, than he is, but he's providing this environment where I could thrive in that environment and I could be a guy who's respected. So I think that putting the cart in front of the horse in that regard of not asking the question, what does your group actually offer? You might think you're the coolest fucking guy in the world, but I promise you, you're probably not. And that you have to provide. One of my mentors told me once that he said, if you're creating something, your idea has to be like a forest, and it must be big enough that many other people can come in and thrive and live off of it. And so I think that having a really big idea and a really good idea of how different types of people can come into this and why they would in the first place. The other thing is that I love what you're talking about. You say you're in Devon, right? That community used to have a very, very strong implication of place and locality. And I think in the internet age, that's been totally lost. And that people think that they're part of a community if they are in a group chat. That's not it. Community and cult and culture and all the rest of these things have to be something that is in a locality where people see each other daily, or at least extremely regularly, and are close enough with each other to be able to actually engage and involve themselves in each other's lives. Because in order to actually be a tribe, there has to be a shared language. There has to be a shared culture, which is something that is an output of that group. And so I think that starting locally is always a great idea. I think you use the raw materials of what you have right around you, which is what we did. You know, we started with myself, my brother, and two other brothers that we'd been friends with forever and ever. And then we looked at who was right in our immediate vicinity, and we started finding guys in various ways at various places, whether it was at local concerts, whether it was at the gym, whether it was through martial arts, whether it was through drinking and partying because we had a shared love of black metal, whatever it was. I think that place is critical, and that for us, Ulfheim, where we've developed over the last like years and years and years, where I live now and all the rest of this, and I'm raising my child there, the place where you do what you're doing becomes as much of a member of your crew and community as any individual that's in it. For me, the idea of the Wolves is totally inseparable from Ulfheim, where we are, the land itself, how it looks, how it feels, the layered experiences that we've had there and all the rest of this stuff. So where you choose to do something is very important. Probably the other two, I don't want to go on forever because there's a lot of this stuff, but maybe the other two is the two things that I've seen destroy groups more than anything, other than money. You know, wealth causes strife amongst kinsmen, but is a loose approach to male-female interpersonal relationships in a group. We have really, really strict and specific rules for how men and women act and operate at our events and individually and all the rest of this kind of stuff. You're not going to see a single guy at one of our events over there talking to people's wives across the thing while they're cooking. It's not going to happen. Or somebody's going to walk over and kick him in the back of the leg and be like, what the fuck are you doing over here? This looks weird. We don't speak certain ways around the women, and it's not because we think that they're these pure little angels who you're going to bruise with whatever. It's that there's decorum there. And so if a woman comes by while, you know, you got a couple of the young guys talking something that's inappropriate sexually or something like that, boy, that conversation shuts down before she gets within earshot, because no one's trying to put those ideas in their brother's old lady's mind, you know? So there's a really strict decorum, and we haven't had a lot of that kind of drama. And when we have, the grass gets cut low so that snakes are very immediately exposed in that regard, and they're treated very harshly. And the last one I would say on that regard is a lack of confrontation. Most guys these days, I think I'm comfortable saying most, they are very, very uncomfortable with physical eye-to-eye confrontation of other people. A lot of this is probably because we do almost everything these days through text. It's very easy to say things when you're not in the same room as somebody. But the need for eye-to-eye, face-to-face conversation while you're looking directly into someone's eye and saying, hey, man, this is unacceptable. Or, hey, so-and-so told me that this had happened. Is that true? I wanted to have a conversation with you about that. Dead on to the eyes. Man, people fear this shit like the fucking plague these days. You'll have guys try to confront you, but they won't even look at you. They won't be able to make eye contact like they're Tom Cruise's autistic brother from Rain Man, you know? And if you don't have that, if you don't have the willingness and the ability to confront other men, and if you don't have the willingness to be confronted, because as much as we have to be confrontational, we have to be willing to be confronted in an organization. Otherwise, things will break down very, very rapidly if you can't do that. You're going to have people talking about other people instead of talking to those people. And that's a cancer that spreads rapidly and kills almost any crew.
Yeah, there's some interesting points there, and that about, I think, some of the problems you've raised about avoiding confrontation and not having like regionally localized communities are both are the problems caused by technology. And so many of the problems that we actually face, whether it's to do with social problems or spiritual problems, are, I think, caused by a wedge driven between man and like natural life and natural spirituality by technologies. Even though there are many positives, of course, like this ability for us to talk to each other now. But I mean, I might be a bit old school in this regard, but I generally advise young people, like when they're looking for girlfriends, like try and find a girl that you can get to a house within an hour or something. Because I mean, I know some guys meet their like love of their life online or whatever, but I've always believed that you need. I mean, it says in Havamal about friendship as well, like go regularly to a friend if you want to keep that friend, because otherwise thorns grow over the path, and you need to go to people. And the same is with relationships with girls. So I make that advice. And do you think technology, do you have any like problems with technology specifically within the community? Do you have rules about that? Or
you know, I mean, you have the bullying. If guys are sitting in the hall and someone's sitting there on their phone, somebody will knock it out of his hand and say, hey, hang up, hang out. That's very common. You know, guys will start slapping at people's phones because you forget, you know, you're so accustomed. It's almost like smoking a cigarette, right? If you're a smoker and you see somebody pull out a cigarette and smoke it, you might pull out one and smoke it. And it's the same way with phones, because they're I would say probably more addictive than cigarettes or a lot of other drugs that I've personally done. It's such a weird disrespect these days where you'll be in the middle of a conversation with someone, making eye contact with them, and while you're talking, they'll pull out their phone and start looking at it. It's like you've lost the face off to whoever's on the other end of that thing or whatever. And it's so common nowadays for someone just to casually disrespect you, where it's bizarre, but I don't even think people really take this into account. And like you said, there's so many wonderful things that these things have done for us, but I always wonder, if I had never been exposed to them, I certainly wouldn't miss them. And that if I wasn't able to, you know, and this is as someone who's benefited wildly from this on a financial level and on the people that I've met and the connections and the traveling I've been able to do and all the rest. But if I hadn't been able to do it, I know what I would have done. I would have done before what I did before I had a smartphone. I didn't have a smartphone until I was like, I don't know, in my late 20s or something like that. And before I had one, I didn't know what was going on out there on the internet. I never had a Facebook until I had gotten into music and they told me you have to have one of these. Prior to that, like I said, I was a Luddite. I had a motorcycle, but I lived out in the woods and I didn't have water. I didn't have power. I didn't give a fuck. And in a lot of ways, I was happier then. You know, it's kind of like the caveman. You bring him into modern world and you show him all this stuff. And then he says, oh, but there's all these bad things. I wish you had never shown me the good ones. You know what I mean? I have a personal sort of, my friend Sam, my best bud, and I are always talking about, you know, Butlerian jihad when, you know, at a certain point, the technology goes so far past convenience and ease of life that it starts to atrophy, you know, and I'm sort of waiting for this inevitable future of human beings just becoming these atrophied things, like floating around with the Neuralink on or whatever. That one of the things he said, you know, the more these people use all this stuff and the more you'll see people, because I'm sure the VR stuff is going to get more and more developed, and The more people who are on that, God bless, the streets will be more open and there will be less traffic for my motorcycle, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about the Butlerian jihad, because in June, that's like, that doesn't exclude all technologies. Like, many of them are kept, but it's specifically like the thinking technologies that have to be done away with. And that's my attitude to technology is, I'm not anti-tech. I just think that we have to take each type of technology on its strengths and merits and its drawbacks, and be willing to cut certain types of technology out when we can see clearly that they're having negative impacts.
For sure. And I think that there is definitely a danger in becoming so resistant to anything new. You know, boots are a fucking technology. Ships are a technology. So it's kind of like one of my brothers in the Wolves is a straight edge. And he always talks about the idea of everyone's edge is different, right? So some guys won't take aspirin. Some guys won't have sex at all. Other guys, it's, well, I just won't have promiscuous sex, you know, and because everyone's edge is different, you know, you always have to ask guys this. They say, oh, well, I won't do this, but I'll take aspirin. And you say, well, that's a performance enhancing drug, right? The argument in sports, if somebody takes caffeine, is that cheating? Because it's been shown to enhance this or that. Is it cheating to have better nutrition than a guy who's maybe poorer than you? Should we bring everything down to this level so that we can compete at the lowest common denominator? And so there's always these questions of where is your line with technology? You know, are you gonna go back to just using sticks and rocks, or if you tie two sticks together, is that too much? So I think there's definitely too much of this sort of thing. But I will say I'm bearish on AI as being a positive thing for humanity, except in that it'll put a bunch of smug leftists out of their jobs. You know, that's fine with me. But
yeah, and it's good if those people lose their jobs, but it's not so great the kind of slop that you see all over YouTube now with like completely AI voice, AI editing, AI video. Like, there's nothing real in the whole thing. And
the only thing I will say about that, though, too, Tom, is that maybe this will change, but it's quite obvious. If you're an artist, it's quite obvious which art is AI, even if you're not an artist right now, but especially if you are one, you'll look for specific little things and you'll see them and you'll know it's AI. It's the same when you read writing. Like, I can 9 times out of fucking 10, if you show me a Chat GPT piece, I can tell you which one is and which one isn't. And I'll put that up against the old Pepsi test. But I think that a lot of people over time, I hope, maybe this is too hopeful for humanity, but I think there will be some people who will be able to intuit what is made by a machine and what's made by humans, or the idea that you have to show your work, right? If I see a Frank Frazetta painting, and I see a photo of him painting it, and I can feel the painting and I can feel the texture of it, I know that that's real and that it has some kind of fucking astral light on it that a machine made and printed thing simply does not have. And so I think that showing your work and being able to show the process, which has always been really powerful in things like marketing, right, is going to become even more important. And it may drive these creatives into more niche areas where their things may become more luxury. But I think there will always be a market, and I don't necessarily just mean a consumer's market, but I think there will always be a demand and a desire for incredible things, beautiful things, wonderful things that were made by people with their own mind, because I think that humans value not just the thing itself, but they value the process of what it took to make that thing.
yeah, I agree. I think that's an inbuilt desire for that. But and also, like, when I'm talking about the changing attitude to technologies, like, sometimes I've been criticized for allowing, like, well, for myself, actually having, like, I write a prayer and I don't have a printer, so I might read it off my phone because it's a new prayer and I haven't memorized it. And some people say you've brought a profane technology into a sacred space. And I can understand what they're saying there, but like, we can also think of, like, runic writing was a technology, chariots were a technology, and swords were a technology, and all these things. Like, there was Indo-European religion before there were chariots, but the gods all got chariots updated. So the latest tech was introduced directly into the most divine thing of all, the myths. So I think that there's got to be this way of, like, preserving the original, you know, values of the tradition, but also integrating it into, you know, the reality of that you live.
Yeah. I think that the danger there with this kind of stuff, especially as it applies to modern technology, is that, for example, you say and this isn't a dig at you, you know what I mean? We've all been in this position, but say you come in and you don't have it memorized and you have to read it off the phone. What happens there is that chances are good that you'll read it off the phone the next time as well. And what it does is it atrophies some of the things that we would have used otherwise. You know, I've seen one of the guys in our crew, he's a writer as well. His name's Troy Weishart, but one of the guys in the Wolves, he will come to our events and our rituals, and he will recite these incredible amounts of the Epic poetry and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And it's not that he just is good at it. It's that he's practiced it a lot, and he's spent a lot of time memorizing these things. And he tells these stories at different rituals at different times. And that if he had just read it off his phone, there would have been a different feeling to that. And I think no one would deny that memorization and recitation are things that are sacred to our people because we have all of these oral traditions. And so I think that if I'm able to just read it off my phone, it's not necessarily that the phone is the bad thing. It's what it leads to, which is it leads to me using the phone instead of reciting. Instead of learning the story, I can rely on this thing. So while I don't think that, oh, well, just because this guy used his phone, the gods have turned their back and the world is going to fucking explode. I do think that on a personal level and on a community level, it's better to show I came here and I memorized this thing because it's what it implies. It implies it was very important to you. There's much more gravitas when you say something from rote and from memory than if you read it off the screen or even off a piece of paper. And so it's not necessarily the technology. It's all the things that it implies had you memorized it.
Yeah, I agree. There is something valuable for that. And the main reason I say in my defense that I don't is because we're in the process of, we're a dynamic group and we're constantly trying to make the prayers better and better. So we talk about what went wrong with the prayers. We talk about what could be more accurate, more pious or whatever, more fitting. And we update them year by year. So there's the same prayer, but it's constantly been changed. So there's no way I can memorize it until we've finally arrived at a final version. And then I can start memorizing it. But I used to have to memorize Old English poetry in Anglo-Saxon for my degree in a non-religious context, and I was able to do it, but I just haven't gotten to that stage yet. But I do think that you have a good point there. But
as you set these things in stone, I'm sure you will memorize them. And so, you know, and what you're doing, I think, is wonderful, which is the idea of saying, instead of just putting it down and saying, nope, this is it, this is the way that it'll be, especially when you're a new group, that ability to be a bit more fluid and to be more flexible with this kind of stuff, I think is a very, very good thing.
The problem with some heathen groups is that they, with all the best intentions, they codify something as that, you know, this is going to be the exact correct ritual, which is what traditional rituals should be. But then when they find that something they did could be made in a better way, they can't back down from that because they put themselves in a position where it's like,
yeah. Well, this goes back to something you were talking about earlier, where you were talking about pitfalls and things people do wrong. One of the funniest things that I see in anything, and this happens with guys who are starting a motorcycle club or a heathen group or whatever it is that they start out with rules. Now, it's good to start out with a general code of conduct, but they go so hard on bylaws and like you said, codifying these things or those things that they don't even know what the fuck they're going to be doing in 2 or 3 years, but they're codifying these things. Ritual should be organic and ritual should serve the community. It should be something that when you go to it, you feel that things have been reestablished, things have been recharged, and those channels that you've cut have had new blood sent through them, but those channels were created over time. You know, one of the things that always really sticks in my mind is the pathway down our hill is this long pathway down from our communal space where the hall is down to where the ritual space is, where the Vey and the Horg is. And it's in the shape of a Sovilo rune. So you walk it every time, and it's a good little ways down. And when we first started walking it, you know, you would start to see the ferns or the moss there would get walked into a little track. But over years and years and years now, then it gets a little bit deeper and the rain starts to run that track. It starts to expose roots and stone. And now the path is like this deep. It bowls in and there's moss all up one side of it. And you can see all these roots that you couldn't see before. And when it rains, you can watch the rain run down this whole track. And to me, that's how ritual should go. That's how the tribe should feel, right? It's by nature of walking this path so many times. Now it's there for good. You know what I mean? But at the beginning, to try to do this is no good.
That's very well put indeed. On the subject of like updating or like and preserving the ancient things within heathenry, I wanted to ask you about your opinion on the ideal of honor, which is so important to all heathens. All heathens talk about honor, but I think that when you look at like how honor is actually understood in the sagas and in old times, it's not quite the same as what a lot of people mean by honor. So is it right, as a given example of some difference, like for a kinship network to share in the honor of an individual within their kinship, like, you know, with it, who's one of their own? For example, if my brother committed a shameful act in a traditional heathen community, that shame would attach as much to me as to him. And also, if someone in another group wronged me, I don't have to take revenge on him. I can take revenge on any of his kinship group, even if they haven't done anything to me. In their version of that would be honorable. Do you think that that's the same honor, kind of honor that you believe in, or has it changed? Or
yeah, I mean, what you said kind of down the line. Not only do I believe it, I've been involved in that exact sort of thing, and believed what I was doing at the time, and still do, was an honorable act. I think one of the most difficult things when you talk about honor, I've known a lot of guys. I've known guys who had it tattooed on their body who didn't know what the fuck it meant. And if you put it to them, what is it? You would get and if you ask 5 different guys in one crew, you may get 5 different answers. To me, it's very simple. What you're talking about is hamingja, right? Is a shared power that can be lessened and increased. And I believe that is what honor is. I think honor and hamingja are inexplicably tied together, because my belief in its simplest fashion, if someone says, what is honor? I would say honor is a thing that is grown through acts of loyalty to an ideal. And if that ideal is your faith, your religion, whatever, or your crew, your family, when you commit acts of loyalty to that, small and large, you increase your honor, your hamingja. And if we view this as a resource for the tribe, just like our money, I believe that hamingja can be used and dipped into like a ladle in a well. I think it's probably one of the reasons some of our guys haven't died in certain situations, why you win various things. We have a really, really strong and very literal belief in this in my crew. And that it's also one of the reasons why it's so important to put back. He who drinks much from the hamingja, if you're riding motorcycles and splitting lanes at 120 miles an hour, you better make sure you're putting something back in there so that when I go to pull my own out, I'm not scraping the dry bottom. And that when acts like these happen, and when acts happen that require the use of hamingja, it should also be like using the money. If I use money from the group's coffer, it should be to make more money, to bring more money back in. And the same with honor and hamingja. If I have to use this force to go do something, it better not be something that's just getting expended for, something frivolous. And so when you talk about these ideas like, if someone in my crew does something shameful, does that affect me? The answer is 100%. I have to be accountable for every single thing that one of my brothers does, because if I'm not, then we do not have a crew. We don't have a community, because there's nothing that binds us together. But we are bound together both by our oath, which has bound us together by what we would call our weird, and that everything that they do lessens or increases. My grandfather used to say that we succeed together or we fail together as a family, period, end of conversation. When you do something, it either increases us or it lessens us. And so the idea of if another group does something to our group, and like I said, this has happened, that's carte blanche on that group, whether they believe what we believe or not. It's not up to me to ensure that they believe the same thing that I do. It's up to me to ensure that what we believe is manifested in a very real way in this world, and that people understand that if you fuck with one of us, then you fuck with all of us. And that is what our honor is about.
I think it's commendable that you retain that in ancient version of honor, which most people don't really understand the word to mean that anymore. I just wanted to clarify for some of the audience who might not be as familiar with the terms that you just used. The Germanic pagan idea of the soul, specifically in the Norse sources, refers to having certain components, including hamingja, which is an inheritable form of luck that people can also, it's connected to you, but you can also give it to someone else. You can lend them your Haminga. And another part is Fulgya, which is connected to Haminga. And that can also there can be a Fulgya, which is not just your individual sort of part of your soul, but one that's shared with a group, including a club or an organization or a family. So these like things all pertain very strongly to your luck, and your honor is affected by your luck, which is what, or your luck is affected by your honor. So if you're dishonorable, then you're going to lose luck. You're going to become less lucky, and all the people within that kinship group will suffer from that unluck by association. So it's something that was extremely, it's not like an abstract thing. It was a real consequences for being associated with a dishonorable person that people were very concerned with. And I think that's what we're talking about.
And with one of the things I think that confused some of our guys when we were younger, when we talk about this concept, and this is a absolutely core concept that every single guy, young or old, in our group understands, because it may be one of the most important things to us that our group is based around, the idea of deed and action and what you say and all the rest of this kind of stuff, literally and even physically affecting people in the group. Is that sometimes people hear luck and they think, oh, well, I don't really believe in luck. If you just change that word and you say personal power, then you don't have to worry about it. It's that things that are productive lead to productivity, and they lead to productive behavior. Things that are unproductive lead to a lessening, right? So this is one of the things, and one of the reasons why gifting remains very important to us as well, is that when we get together for Sumbul, which Sumbul is, I know you know this, but for people watching, Sumbul is a ritualized drinking rounds that you'll see a lot of different variations on. But for us during Sumbul, it's very common to see gifts given, and sometimes incredible ones. I've seen Harley Davidsons given away at Sumbul. I've seen really, really incredible stuff.
That's a good symbol to be at.
No doubt. I had a bike ridden up and given to me at one Sumbul, and I also have given one to another guy. And it's not to flex on someone by giving them something that is showy and to show them that they owe you. It's a transference of Haminga. In other words, if I have at one of our last ones, a fellow who was out from our Western crew out in Colorado, he was here, and maybe he's a guy who goes under the radar sometimes because he's not very showy, he's not very loud. But his life is one, I believe, that has shown loyalty as he's just like a living rune of that idea, and he embodies that concept of true loyalty. And so I had this wolf hide that I've had forever and ever. And I mean, I've done a million rituals in it. I was married in it. And it's been very important to me, and a lot's been done wearing it ritually and otherwise. And I gave it to him, and you could see that he could feel exactly what I was giving to him. I wasn't giving him an old wolf hide. I was giving him everything that went along with that. And it was a transference of personal power. It was, hey, now you have this thing that has all this on it. And you could see in his eyes, he knew, and he could feel, and you could feel the personal might increase. And so I think this is one of the reasons why gift giving is very important. Is I'm not going to go somewhere and buy something unimportant and give it to them as a last minute thought. I want to give them something that increases their Haminga, that makes their personal might go up, that they might do wonderful things with, that will bring tribe honor up. Because then in a direct fashion, I am benefited then again by the giving and by the show of largesse. It all comes back into the well, right?
Yeah. This is a prehistoric, actually, like Indo-European thing that the Germanic people preserved, the idea of the gift cycle. And the whole economy was based on this idea of like everyone gives to the Lord and the Lord just gives it all back again. So he distributes it. And it's like this, the idea of economy was so different to what we now think of. It was all about recycling it. Like you go out and raid and take from other people, and then it all goes to the Lord, who redistributes it again, and then and according to his view of who has done the greatest service to the group. So it's a commendable form of economy, I think, and it can be replicated on a smaller scale in the form of like groups and tribes. We had some gift giving in my at Sumbul in my group as well, but it was only me giving group gifts. So after a while, the group grew. I was like, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah. Then you have to get a little bit more selective with who you give stuff to, right? Yeah, we call it a gift war because oftentimes it will turn into one where, you give somebody something that's meaningful or really cool that you knew they would really like, and they go, all right, motherfucker. And then they come back and then they bring you something, and it's never intended as a show of like personal wealth, or as a I want to give this person something that's more financially valuable. It's, what can I give this person as a one up that will be extremely meaningful to them? And so sometimes you'll see these little cycles go back and forth where guys will be involved in this kind of like friendly gift giving war for 4 or 5 or 6 months before they finally go, okay, we'll move on now to somebody else, but it's wonderful to see. I always love to see that stuff.
And it cements the bonds within the group. It keeps the group strong.
Very much. Very much. And, you see a chain or something around your neck, or a hammer, or even the braid that it's on, all things that were given to me. When you see them, you remember the person who gave it to you. And so on a very basic level, obviously, of gift giving, it's important.
Another ideal, an ancient ideal, which is not so much associated with heathens, but rather the Christians of the Middle Ages, which I think is misunderstood as well, is chivalry, originally meaning like horse riding and stuff. But within like romantic literature of the Middle Ages, it took on an ideal of manly virtues within like the high Middle Ages Christian culture, which was not common to all people or all men. It was just an elite, or a military elite, or men who were trained to be knights. And you talk about a version of this called brutal chivalry. Can you explain what that is and how that differs from like chivalry in general?
Yeah, I like to come up with terms for stuff that sound cool, you know what I mean? But the point of it is that I think that one of the great failures of I'll just say Caucasian people in general is that they have an idea of the way the world is, and they expect everyone to have the same idea, and they get fucked by that over and over and over. And also they have a sense of fairness that a lot of other people of other beliefs, other faiths do not share with them, but that they think there's something noble in adhering to these ideas, even as it applies to people who don't believe in it, because they think there's this nobility in holding to this kind of stuff, which I think is ridiculous. And I think it's one of the great downfalls of the West. And so when we talk about chivalry as an idea, obviously it's not just a code of conduct that involves, protecting the weak and so on and so forth, although all these things are good. To have a high compass and a strong moral ground is good. And to know what that is critical for us to live our lives. We have to know what it is that we adhere to. But we also have to be realistic. There's that word, but we have to be realists about the way the world is, and that we can't be afraid to completely revoke our own personal honor systems from those people who are not deserving to be within that. The honor system exists for the community. So for me, my honor system goes to the wolves mandatorily, and it goes outside of that to people who know how to act as a courtesy. But that courtesy is not mandatory for me. I choose to be courteous, and I choose to treat people well until they give me a reason not to. But it's a choice. So within the crew, it's frith, your oath to it. You have to adhere to this. But outside, I don't give a fuck. I can lie to people. I can cheat them. I can steal from them. I can brutalize them. I can jump them. I can do whatever I want to. And it does not lessen my honor. It does not lessen my hamiya. And I think that in this day and age, a certain brutality is called for, because even if we look at medieval Europe, where you had guys, the way that you made your money on the fucking battlefield was to kidnap other guys who had money and take them hostage, and they'd sit in your hall. And we get a lot of stories about this where it doesn't seem that bad to have been captured by somebody. You were on your own honor to not escape from their castle. They were under their honor to feed you well and clothe you and all the rest. And then a lot of these guys would get given the freedom to go and get their own ransom, because they knew that they would send them their ransom, because they were under the idea of chivalry.
Yeah.
This world is not that world.
Nobles treating other nobles as nobles, basically. It was about
100%.
Yeah.
And in order to treat someone that way, they have to be noble. And to be noble means to have honor. And if they don't have that, then you can't treat them this way. And so the idea is just to say, have a conduct code and have a very, very idealized one, I think, within your own peer group and your own honor group. But outside of it, these people don't mean anything if they don't mean anything, and I'm not a brother to the world. And I would say that I'm not even a brother to other people of European descent necessarily. They're not within my honor group. And so a lot of them that I've met have been complete scumbags, and I have no desire or willingness to extend them my own courtesies,
Mm-hmm. I mean, even you can see something similar in like the Arthurian literature, where they like treat an enemy knight very well, but they'll just go past a bunch of peasants and kill them without thinking about it. But going back to heathenry, I wanted to ask like how your religion as a heathen, because a lot of the audience here are specifically heathen people, like how that features in your personal life, not just in the Wolves of Vinland, because I've got now 2 kids, and I do my main blocks like 4 or 5 times a year with like the hearth, but I do a lot more things just at home, like maybe once every couple of weeks, have little prayers. And my son actually asks me, like, can we pray to the ancestors and stuff like that? Because he specifically loves the ancestors a lot more than the gods. But and I have a little house shrine, or 2 house shrines, and a third shrine for the ancestors at the house. And I just thought, how do the gods or your ancestors feature in your life and your home life and your family life?
One of the things that I love most about, I wish I could say paganism or heathenry as a whole, but that would not be true, because I think, unfortunately, largely, I think it's a goof troop. I've seen a lot of absurdities done in the name of it, but that I think at its core, especially as we talk about with ancestor worship as its core, and the idea of blood and soil and locality as its core, what I love about it is that it's very practical. It's very down to earth, and that I would say that first, there is no difference, and I know what you meant, but there is no real difference between my personal life and the Wolves. So, I live, it's kind of hard if you can't see where I live, but I live right here in the woods, and just here across my drive is the long hall, and then just down the hill from that is the Horg, and just down the hill from that is the gym. So I don't even have to leave that locality very often, and these days I don't. And so I wake up surrounded by all of this stuff. It's not like I go to church on Sunday and then I'm not there anymore. It's there. And I think that the practical nature of this kind of stuff, you talked about how your son is more interested in the ancestor stuff than he is in anything else. And that it's wonderful to hear that, because my little boy, I have a book, a picture book that I wrote for kids that's about that. And I read it to him and he loves it, and he'll come up on the steps and he'll recite little lines from it and all this and that. And when he looks at my tattoos and stuff, he says, "Oh, those are runes, Papa, those are runes." And he knows the name of a lot of them, because we'll go over, he sees the big one on my arm and he says manas, he says them very well. And so where it enters into, I would say, like my family life, my little day-to-day life, is that I do pray. I have one prayer that I say every night, which is, "You mothers and fathers who are still alive in my blood, give strength to me, your loyal son." I think that says a lot within a very short period. It encapsulates a great deal about what I believe. And for me, the idea of the gods and things like this, they're almost too large, too awful, too awesome for the day-to-day. I think especially with the little ones too, what is the word? Euhemerization?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hemerism, yeah.
Yeah, you almost have to adhere to this idea, which I actually believe in as part of what I believe, is that they were ancestors, but maybe they were many of them who were put into one sort of, I don't want to use the word they're just archetypes, but I mean many powerful people who have gone before, who were put into one idea of saying these were all people who typified this. And maybe there was one progenitor for this, whether that was Odin or Vidal, Vilmaith, and Svarthofi, whoever it might have been. But I think that when you make it simple for the little ones, you make it simple for yourself. And I realized that it's not really important for me to express this in a very wide way. I have little places that I have set up as shrines. I have one simple prayer that I do. The monthly ritual for us is the big one. So every month we come down and we do one that follows the course of the year. but being there for the community and doing the ritual for the community, then I would say does affect my normal day-to-day life, because I think about what's been done. I think about what's been said and these principles and these ideas. And I'm also, as one of the guys who puts on the rituals with my crew, I'm always thinking about the next one as well. And so I think it gives us an intentional look at the natural world around us, as we're always looking for these examples in things that we can see and know and touch and feel. And that the rest of it for me is 100% on a day-to-day about ancestor worship and the idea of giving worth to my family line to make sure that I'm increasing my genetic materials, that the Othala, this priceless inheritance that I've been left, I'm not squandering it as a shitty son, and that I'm doing something with it so that I can leave a greater estate to my boy that he can leave to his. And I think for me, that is the religion. It's the adherence to the narrative of being part of this great line. You touched on it earlier when you talked about the idea that you didn't want to be an individual. You wanted to be a part of something. And what I would tell a lot of the guys out there who maybe don't have their own community, it's very important still to remember that you are part of something. You are part of that family line, which is very real and that is in a very literal sense wrapped around your bones and running through your veins right now. You are always a part of something. And in order to be able, after you die, to stand there among those great men who came before you is the point of living. And it's the point of living with honor and attaining hamingya and all the rest of this kind of stuff. So that's the day-to-day practice is every moment of the day, you know?
I think that's natural as well, that the ancestors feature more largely in day-to-day practice. I think that's historically natural. And I've also said to like a lot of people who message me starting out and they're not sure how to approach the gods, I say start with the ancestors because they're more approachable, more easy to understand, and they're there for you specifically. But my view of the gods is that they have a greater power to provide help. But I guess also the gods love those who help themselves. But maybe, do you actually ever ask for help from the gods? Have you ever done that?
Yeah, it's a funny one, right? And I know you're familiar with the story where they say in one of the old sagas, they say, "What did you do there?" Right? The guy's he's re-blessing the heathen sacrifice, and his buddy says, he's making the sign of the hammer over it, and he says, "As all men do who trust in their own might and main." It implies that at least there was some precedent for this. Mm-hmm. You know, he says, as everyone mm-hmm. does, and they said, well, that wasn't what that was. That was the sign of the cross. Yeah. We fucking know what that was. Yeah.
He's tricking them.
But I wear a Thor's hammer, and I have one tattooed on me and all the rest of this kind of thing. But I'm going to try to not drag this on and be as succinct as I can. But when I was young, I wasn't interested in the pantheon. I wasn't interested in any of these other gods. I was only interested in Odin. And I was only interested in living in line with these ideas that I saw as typified by him. And I had a very literal and fanatical approach to that, I would say. I wrote poetry. I practiced music. I fully immersed myself lifelong in the runes. And I would say even in the darker parts of that Odinic aspect of manipulation and getting what you want no matter what and all the rest, that was who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be. And it wasn't until I had a son that I started actually, wearing a Thor's hammer and the rest, and realizing that part of my life wasn't gone, but that I had to ascribe to more solidity. Odin, they call Svipal, right? The ever-changing one. And I couldn't be ever changing anymore. I had to be solid. And I couldn't wake up one morning after eating 6 hits of acid and decide I was going to put my backpack on my motorcycle and fuck off for a month. I used to do that kind of stuff, but I can't do that anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. I am where I want to be, and I want to protect that. And I remember one day, I had like thrown the hammer on and stuff. And when you said the gods help those who help themselves, I ascribe to that as well. I think that to worship Thor, to honor Thor, is to be strong, is to engage in the acts that make you powerful. Thor was a wrestler. He was a fighter. He was a lifter of big things and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And I like that as well. So I think that asking them for help, if you ask me, do I pray like, Conan and the Crom scene? No. But when I put the hammer on and I'm looking at certain things, I would say that is an internal prayer that is asking for aid, that is asking for that feeling of red Thor, that hammer, to become that, to be able to become like him, to see that if a man can give another man Hamingia, then certainly the gods can give us part of their Hamingia, and to ask for some of that from time to time, in an internal fashion, I would say very, very much so. And I do very much believe that there's a power to that. Although with many things I am a skeptic. If people tell me a lot of stuff, I'm skeptical always. But in my personal life, I am a fanatic. I believe what I believe, and I don't need it to be rational or explained. And I believe that faith and fanaticism is the enemy of rationality. I'm not interested in believing in my gods in a rational, realistic way. I'm a true believer.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that people experience personally is meant to be experienced personally, and there's no reason that other people should believe everything they're told about other people's personal experiences. You should focus on what you experience. But I'm interested in you saying that Odin featured so large. Was he what initially attracted you to Germanic heathenry, or what was it that first brought you in? How old were you as well? And I want to know do you think since that initial time that you first became involved, do you think heathenry has the potency of heathenry as a spiritual force in the world has increased?
I was introduced to it at a very, very small age. My mother read aloud to us, or my father did, and the whole time I was a little boy. And so very, very small, my mother read a book called The Song of Roland to us, and it grabbed me very, very strongly. These stories of heroism and berserkers and all this stuff. As a little boy, might be attracted to the basics of it. But when I was, I think probably 9 or 10 was the first time I had ever seen the runes in any other context than when I had read The Hobbit. I started reading at a really early age. I was homeschooled, and my folks, it was very important. So I started reading by like 4. And so The Hobbit was one of the first few books that they had given me to puzzle out to read. And so, you see the 5 feet high the door and 2 may walk abreast and all the little ones on the map. But I thought that they were just part of that world. And so it wasn't until I was a couple years older that I realized they were real. They were a linguistic inheritance down from my ancestors. And my last name is Waggener, but the Waggeners that come from Holland after Wageningen is the name originally was Geroldsson. So I do have some Scandinavian ancestry. And when I realized that this was a thing that was part of my genetic inheritance, it stuck with me immediately. I remember the first time I saw a swastika, and you see these things and you know that they're for you. You know beyond the shadow of a doubt that they're for you. And I would say from 10 to now, I've never not had a week where I wasn't meditating and studying and working with the runes and all the rest. And to have started to read the lore on Odin, as, I mean, how can a young guy who's into what I was into not read something like Odin as Lord of the Ghouls and the Hanged and all the rest? And there was this grimness to it that I liked, but there was also this idea of self-transformative power, of sacrificing who you are for what you could become, that has appealed to me and will appeal to me for my entire life. So it was what got me into it, and ritual and all those things, those Odinic things, were the reason that I was interested in starting the Wolves, not to be a part of the greater Germanic heathen community or anything, which we've never considered ourselves to be a part of. And they've definitely never considered us to be a part of what they do. That's for sure. And so I think that as a whole, I think that anytime you see something diluted, it starts to lose a little bit of its force. I don't think that paganism and pagan belief is done a great service by guys cornrowing their hair and getting a rune tattoo down the side of their head. Nor do I think I don't think its gravitas is greatly increased by seeing Vegvisers tattooed on everyone and seeing stuff like transphobes don't get into Valhalla and all the rest of this kind of stuff. I think it's a great dilution. And I think like everything that becomes thrown to the masses, it becomes more like McDonald's than it does anything else. And so I think that what keeps current strong will always be the same. And I think it was the same back in our ancestors' days. I think small groups of incredibly serious people who believe in themselves and believe in what they are doing is who keeps the current strong. And the rest of it is pearls to pigs.
And to finish off, I want to follow up on that elitist theme there. And because you and I both students of Evola, which is probably the most...
you may be a student. I've read some.
By student, I mean, I've read, so I haven't read every single book he's done, but I've read most of his books. But he's probably the one author of the right who has the most people pretending to have read him who haven't ever read him. And so he's quite often misunderstood. One of the things that's very often misunderstood is the title of his post-war book, Ride the Tiger, where he advocated for non-outcome dependent actions in the modern world, which people misinterpret to mean non-action or like just, just not doing anything, which is not at all what he did. He was politically active after the war, so it's just not true at all. But and not an excuse for inaction. But what I wanted to know is how, if you believe in that ride the tiger principles, I think you do, but how does one balance that kind of lofty detachment, which he advocated for, with the necessary participation in the world that we live in, being a man of action?
I think that's always a question for the ages. One of the things that my father talks about often as an Orthodox guy who I have a ton of respect for, is that it's important to be in the world, but not of the world. And man, there's so many correlations between my beliefs and what my father believes, even before he was Orthodox. But if there's one Christianity that's the most like paganism, and I know what they would say about that, but it's Orthodoxy, and that being in the world by necessity because we have to live in the time and the age that we were born into, and not being of the world, that is to not be a product of it. I always refer to this line from a movie where in the beginning of this movie, The Departed, Jack Nicholson says, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me. And I think that remembering that we are not or should not be receivers. We should be broadcasters and transmitters of tradition, which is what Evola would call it, and to transmit these traditions into the time that we are in now. And that even though we can live in the world, we cannot be blown around by its winds all the time. We can have this anchor in tradition with the capital T. And that I think some of it, and maybe the Baron wouldn't necessarily agree with me. I don't know what kind of sense of humor he had in life, but having a sense of humor about what we do and where we are, but also maintaining a seriousness of the idea of saying that we weren't born into the wrong time. You always hear guys talk about this. No, we were born into the exact time that we needed to be born into, and it needs us now more than it ever did. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read this little piece, and I'm going to do it off my fucking phone.
Please
Tom.
do. Yes.
This is an Evola quote that has meant a lot to me. He says, he talked about our era here, and he said, this is not a matter of compromise or adaptations. The power of a new Middle Ages is needed. A change interior as well as exterior of barbaric purity is required. Philosophy, culture, everyday politics, no more of all that. It's not a matter of shifting to the other side of this bed of agony. It's a matter of finally waking up and standing on one's own feet. And I think that his idea here, and you'll read you'll see a lot of people who pretend to read him, and then they'll ask if I'm fucking voting for Trump or something. And you say, well, I don't care about modern politics. There's plenty of people who care about that stuff, who know more about it and are better suited to discuss it than me. What I care about is a barbaric purity, and of embracing this idea of sort of a new Middle Ages and saying, look, the change has to be interior, and we have to be able to wear armor and be a fortress against this modern world, while at the same time realizing we are a fortress within that modern world and should act as a bastion for those other people like us who are bearing that torch of tradition, and say, hey, you can come inside, but they sure as fuck can't, and be able to hold that,
Paul Waggener, I hope you'll continue to be that fortress for a long time to come, and keep on helping all the people who listen to your podcast and learn from you in other ways as well. And thank you very much for coming on Jive Talk today.
Hey, thanks so much, Tom. Great to talk to you, bro.
And you. Are you interested in worshipping the gods of ancient England and Scandinavia, but you're not sure how to do it? Starting Heathenry is a ritual-focused online course which will furnish you with the knowledge and confidence to practice the heathen religion, alone or with others. The course teaches you how to construct heathen prayers for yourself, not according to the established rites of any modern group, but according to what historical sources show. Starting Heathenry assumes you're interested in Germanic paganism, know about the gods and myths, and want to begin practicing this religion, but require guidance on how to do so. It is based on a micro-learning structure, which is proven to improve knowledge retention by up to 80% in students compared to other learning methods. You get more than 5 hours of learning material, bit by bit, as you please. A modern method of learning about an ancient religion. Your path to knowing the gods through ritual starts here.